governance as bifurcated. On the one hand, political governance as the means in which, the mechanisms in which individual bodies are controlled and conformed and forced to assimilate, right? So on the other hand, then, we have a more agent-centric political ideology, which is perpetually looking for more rights for the individual. So the individual, I guess I will incorporate this. I didn't really want to discuss it, but I'll just, since I already put it out there, the individual, and we have two things that are happening. We have a mechanism in place, right? Governance, right? A-N-C-E, right? We have governance, which is about sort of the control of the individual. In not necessarily a bad guy, boogeyman sense, but that's the whole idea of governance. In another sense, we have sort of this rights-based, we have this rights-based assessment where the individual is directed towards increasingly identifying more and more and more rights, right? We have the right to vote, we have the right to education, we have the right to marry who we want, we have the right to worship how we want, we have the right to blah, 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 blah. So that if you consolidate all of political theory, and it's a lot of it, you consolidate all of political theory, you get two, it doesn't have to be polemic, but you really, it solidifies everything in political theory, solidifies down to these 2 points. The portion of political structures and bureaucracy which has to control, by definition, and the parts of political governance that has to recognize this rights-based assessments that individuals are inherently going to want and want represented within their governance because of the freedom to choose, right? Now granted, me personally, I believe that freedom is more properly described in terms of creation, not choice, but if you want to hear my discourse on that, just in my YouTube lecture series search, type in popcorn, just type in popcorn and it'll pop up. I did a 2-part super short discussion called popcorn flavored ice cream, and the idea is that when we talk about freedom, freedom is better articulated in terms of creation rather than in Heideggerian sense almost, rather than choice. But that's neither here nor there. Okay, so now we have a good conceptual foundation for an analysis of the class-based discourse, which is obviously Platonic. And we'll talk about the regime in a bit. The importance is Al-Farabi undeniably, and I think rather geniusly, there's no question, rather geniusly identifies, and he synthesizes both Plato and Aristotle, so in a sense, his contribution, it's not fair to say that it's better than Plato or Aristotle, but it's a synthesis of two discourses, and we know that Plato is thesis, Aristotle is antithesis. I don't want to go as far as saying that Al-Farabi is synthesis, because all of the Western philosophers would be all pissed with me, but the idea is, yeah, there is a sense of synthesis here. He takes the best of Plato and the best of Aristotle, and he synthesizes both of those concepts, which allows us to really get to the nitty-gritty of the foundational concepts which inhere in any political discourse, right? So I do have a fond appreciation of Al-Farabi's insight. Alright, so now we have an understanding of the virtuous regime. Virtuous regime is directed towards happiness, happiness in terms of Aristotelian eudaimonia. The way that we get to the virtuous regime is a recognition that there has to be a consolidation within the virtuous aggregate of individual bodies within the state and the leader as a virtuous representative. When we have that homogeneous relationship between the virtuous state and the virtuous leader, then we recognize that the state, the regime, moves towards eudaimonia, right? That's basically what's being said. So the three classes then. Alright, the three classes, here's a direct quote from the text. So quote, "The wise or the philosopher who know the nature of things by means of demonstrative proof and by their own insight." So that the first class, the highest class, quote unquote, right? And a class-based discourse, I inherently recognize that people are going to have an aversion to because it's situated purposefully hierarchically, right? And I know it inherent, and this is a problem with Aristotle, it inherently elicits this sort of elitist rejection, right? Oh, anyone who would argue for class-based discourse, immediately assumes an elitist position. I would just direct them to the works of Marx. It's not necessarily true, right? You can make identifications of the fact, but we're not talking about a utopian state where everyone's, sitting around roasting marshmallows over a fire, right? Human beings undeniably aggregate and collectivize and organize and compartmentalize themselves according to rank, right? And it's totally arbitrary that some individuals and some groups and some types of thought gain higher ranks than the other, but it is what it is, right? I'm not here to do the socio-anthropological discourse on why it is the case that happens. I have no idea why we do that. It'd be an awesome channel. Now that I think about it, I would love an anthropologist or hardcore sociologist, and also, I hope this person's out there. If you know, just quick tangent, because now I'm like, no, I want to learn more. If you know of a channel on YouTube, where if you're watching now, and of course, every time I say this, someone responds, you guys watch everything I throw up, which is crazy. And then even more bizarre, I watch everything I throw up after the fact, which is even more crazy. But if you know of anyone who does anthropology heavy on YouTube or sociology heavy on YouTube, and they have a YouTube channel like mine, sort of this format, then send me a link to their channel so I can watch them, because I'm totally fascinated by anthropology, right? In another life, I would have been an anthropologist, especially that cultural anthropology. That's the type of stuff that I love. So if you know of anyone who has a channel that does primarily anthropology, send me the link so I can watch them, because I would like to know why it is the case that humans do this, right? Why is it the case that human beings, I won't go as far as saying inherently, but I mean, we're talking from the beginning of civilization until now, organize themselves hierarchically. I really don't know why. I know that, and I know how. So we have the philosopher at the top. And for those of you who know Plato's Republic, the general idea is, you have the philosopher king and blah, 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 blah. You have the sort of the judicial military class, and you have the merchant class, blah, blah, blah. We know how this unfolds in Plato's Republic. In fairness to Al-Farabi, it's not simply a cut and paste of Plato's Republic, because Al-Farabi, takes it in a different direction, right? So don't just think, oh well, he's not really, Al-Farabi's not really contributing anything new because this is just Plato. It's not. Okay. So also, let me give a characteristic. The role of the philosopher is that the philosopher knows the nature of things, right? So the philosopher knows the philosopher knows the nature of things. In a contemporary setting, I would say, it's the academic now. I wouldn't just say the philosopher now, the physicist, the philosopher, sociologist, anthropologist, historian, blah, 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 blah. Okay, number two, we'll just label it the followers. Okay. The followers of these who know the nature of things by means of demonstrations presented by the philosopher. It's you guys, right? I being the philosopher, it's a ridiculous comparison, but just so that this is clear, I being the philosopher know, quote unquote, the nature of things. I demonstrate my knowledge. I present my knowledge of things to you. You are not like everyone else. If you're watching this video, right, advanced political philosophy, theories in political philosophy, who are you to watch this type? I mean, the type of person that you must be, and not follow in a pejorative sense, right? The word selection here is a bit iffy, but the idea is, and I can't read Al-Farabi in the original. I can't imagine how amazing it must be to read it in the original. The idea with Al-Farabi, followers, okay, fine, but it's not pejoratively. It is sort of the educational system in a traditional sense, like what Freire might critique. There is the individual who knows, the educator. There is the individual who seeks knowledge, the master-apprentice. I would like sort of master-apprentice relationship discourse better than philosopher-follower, because it doesn't have that sort of pejorative sense, this sort of elitist philosopher and people who follow. The idea is more, for me, is better articulated in terms of master and apprentice, right? Master-apprentice discourse, you have an individual who demonstrates understanding, craftsmanship, if you will. You go to a blacksmith, you know he's a good blacksmith because he can make the Hattori Hanzo sword.